Good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us. My name is Carol Ofafa. I'm a researcher at the African School of Regulation. Welcome to today's FSR talk called Energy Regulation in Africa, Political Economy, Emerging Technologies, and Regional Collaboration. The FSR Talk series is a monthly platform that convenes policymakers and academics to engage in discussions on pertinent issues concerning energy and climate regulation. Today, we are joined by two experts, Dr. Ishmael Ackah, who is an esteemed energy expert at the Executive Secretary of Ghana Public Utilities Regulatory Commission. He chairs the Legal and Regulatory Committee of Ghana Electricity Market Oversight Panel. With a background working on USAID-funded projects managed by Deloitte, Dr. Ackah brings a wealth of knowledge in policy, regulation, and consultancy. He also holds a PhD in energy economics from the University of Portsmouth. We are also joined by Dr. Charly Gatete, who is a senior researcher at the African School of Regulation. Charly is a seasoned energy economist with a profound expertise in regional electricity markets. Charly holds a PhD in energy economics from the University of Paris, Saclay, and another in energy from 2IE, Burkina Faso. As an economic expert at ECOWAS and previously with ERERA, he's significantly a guest who is valuable to this discussion. The next person I'd like to introduce is our discussant for the day, Louise Matthew, who is currently a consultant with the African School of Regulation, previously a regulatory expert under the African Union Technical Assistance Facility for Sustainable Energy. Supporting the initiative to establish the ASR, Louise has experience in energy project financing while at the Kenya's largest commercial bank and as a commercial legal counsel for Kenya's main national power distribution company. Welcome to our speakers and our discussant. And today we are going to delve deeper into the chapter written by our two speakers in this very important book. So right now, I'd like to hand over to Louise Matthew, our discussant, who will introduce herself briefly, and then we will give Dr. Ackah and Dr. Charly a chance to give us more on the book before we go into the questions. So Louise?
Thank you so much, Carol, for that introduction. Delighted to have this forum where we'll be delving within the limited time into some insights that have been shared with us by Dr. Charly Gatete and Dr. Ishmael Ackah. This is a really, really important book, I believe, for the African continent and for anybody who is interested in policy and regulation and the energy sector in Africa generally. So thank you so much. As Carol has introduced me, my name is Louise Matthew, and I'm supporting the African School of Regulation in program affairs, training development, and other aspects. I will invite now Dr. Charly, if you could give your introductory remarks, about 2 minutes or so, with regard to the book, and thereafter Dr. Ishmael Ackah, 2 or so minutes, some introductory remarks as well, and then we'll delve into the questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. It's a pleasure, first of all, to thank ESL and FSL for inviting us for this talk. It's a very interesting one, and we want to use this talk is this kind of event that's important for our continent in terms of knowledge sharing, in terms of regulation, energy regulation. And this is what also definitively my colleague Ackah and I trying to do by publishing this book. The idea is to increase the knowledge base in terms of energy regulation in Africa. And it's a pleasure for us to be here to share something with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gatete. Thank you so much. Dr. Ishmael Ackah, some introductory remarks from you, please.
Thank you very much. And I'm also happy to be here. And thank you for the invitation. I think we got this inspiration from a number of factors. One of them is that over the post-independence Africa, we've seen many countries moving from state-owned utilities to getting in private sector. So sources of funding are changing. We also see some moving from one source of technology for power generation to different forms. So in the past, maybe hydro-dominated, or in Southern Africa, coal-dominated. We see new technologies coming. We also see emergence of independent regulators across the continent. So we wanted to see what does it mean? What can the regulator do to move Africa from where we have low access to high access, to where we have unreliable electricity to high level of reliability, to where we have fossil fuel dominated generation, to where we have sustainable sources of electricity generation. So this inspired us to put the book together, and I think that we are very happy to be here. We are very happy to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ackah. Thank you so much. I'll encourage participants in this session to please feel free, pose your questions in the chat box, and we will be addressing this at the end. All right, so our first question, I'll pick up on something that you said, Dr. Ackah, the inspiration behind this book, and the evolution of the power sector in Africa. You've mentioned that a lot of the utilities are moving from being wholly state-owned to possibly partially state-owned, or partially privately owned or wholly privately owned. So my question would be, just drawing from that statement that you've made, can you just tell us a little bit about the key factors that influence the political economy of energy regulation in Africa? I think this is quite, a loaded question, I believe. But if you could just tell us a little bit about that. Key factors influencing political economy of energy regulation in Africa. I'll start with you, Dr. Ackah.
Okay, thank you very much. So I think before we can even look at the political economy, we should first look at the energy objectives of every African country. So we are looking at getting access to reliable and affordable power. That is what African countries want. Unfortunately, a lot of people, quite a number of our population, do not have access. Those who have access, we see more than 25% not even having reliable service. We see also another high percentage not having affordable power, even if you have that reliability. So regulatory institutions were established, to help in so many ways, attract investment from non-government sources, to provide that confidence for somebody who wants to put in money, to guarantee that whoever is putting in money will get a fair return and you get your money back. Again, to also protect the customer, that yes, we'll be there for you. You are dealing with a natural monopoly, a very big company. So we will not allow that company to override you and so many other things. However, we see that whilst most of the time they are created as independent, we need to look at independent from three sources. So first, independent in terms of establishment, whether they are established by law or by a policy. Then second, independent in terms of sources of funding. Then the third, we are looking at independent in terms of whether they even have that administrative control over their own functions, whether they can recruit, not just the political assignment and others. Now, when you look at in terms of establishment, again, we see now more than 70% of the regulatory institutions in Africa are either established by law, an act, or maybe a decree. So that has been established. So within law, we have independent regulators with clear functions to help provide licensing, to deal with customer issues, to deal with tariff issues, quality of service issues. The second issue is where the challenge is, and that is the funding. So again, there's a division where we have, for instance, in Namibia, Uganda, Ghana, and others, getting funding from a levy imposed on either electricity generated, consumed, or transmitted, which is good. But we will still have some regulators, like, for instance, in Burkina Faso, where they depend on government budget. Now, when you depend on government budget, that is where the political economy question arises. That is one source. Because government may want the regulator to do certain things beyond the energy goals. And one of them, for instance, is elections. And for government to be popular, they want power, for instance, to be cheap for people. cheaper power may not be able to recover the investment. So whilst you may set tariffs artificially low because government wants you to, you may not get investment. So at times, because of lack of funding, independent sources of funding, regulators become more like subject to the control of the government. So that is the first one. The second one, in terms of the whole political economy, is even the appointment, how the regulator, the CEO, the board are appointed, whether they are appointed directly through competition and so many other, whether party members or all those ones also count. Then we can even talk about staffing. We can talk about the technical skills of even the regulatory institution. So we see some regulatory institutions living now, like in Liberia and few others, where they depend on consultants to do the tariff. Now, when you depend solely on external people and you are not ensuring that the skills and knowledge transfer, it weakens the independence of the regulator. So these are some of the factors. Finally, let me also mention the general macroeconomic issues, the conflicts, and other things that may also shape how the regulator behaves within that political economy angle. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Ackah. Very, very interesting insights there. On when we talk about independence of regulator, what are we talking about? How they establish sources of funding, also macroeconomic factors that need to be taken into account. Dr. Charly, if I could invite you also, give us your input to that question. Some of the key factors that impact the political economy of energy regulation in Africa. You're on
Yes,
mute,
can you hear
Dr.
me?
Charly?
Yes, that's okay now. I think so.
Yes.
Yes, my colleague already talk about everything. I think what is there is correct. And what I want to just add, I want to just one point is the point of the importance to regulator to have is independence. And the independence, yes, of course, is quite on this question of financing. But the independence also is a question of how it can be enforced. The regulator can enforce his decision. And for that, it's important for regulator to go through a process that can be also the principle of transparency. Have a communication that can help them to be to share that this regulation that they are implementing can be well implemented and accepted by that about that in this point. Thank you.
Louise, I do have a follow-up question for our speakers based on their comments. I know that independence in the regulator has come out very strongly from your remarks. But I do have a question. How do you navigate in a situation where the budget for the national regulators is handled, is managed, handled, or even decided by the political economy? How can then the regulator achieve independence if they do not have economic independence in that regard? How do you envision that that type of conflict? Yeah.
Okay, so Doc, maybe I'll go first, then you can come in. But I think first of all, to enhance independence, to ensure independence, the source of funding should be independent, first of all. So you should have, let's say, a levy or some way that the regulator is not dependent on government budget, because one government budget may delay. If it delays, it means regulatory work may also delay. At times, they may cut it because some government officials may not even understand why there should be a regulator. And if they cut it, again, it will affect the work. So you should have independent source of funding. But if you don't have, the alternative is also to mobilize stakeholders, to let them, so the regulator should also be transparent and accountable in their own activities too. Now, what you are doing, if you are showing your results, if you are showing your process, if you are letting people know what you are doing, and they know the benefits and they see the outcomes, I think stakeholders can also mobilize to support you to get maybe either your source of funding, either from the budget early or maybe enough. But I think most importantly, an independent regulator should have an independent source of funding. Thank you.
That's all. That's all. And the independence is started by the funding, by the independence of source of funding. If you are dependent of someone, your hand is tied. So it's so difficult for that. So it's important to have a source of funding based, for example, on the market, but through a levy collection. When you are collecting levy and your budget is based on the market, you are committed also to be more effective in your what you're doing, your daily work. So it's important also on that for regulator to be more effective when the source of funding is based on levy collected in the market. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that follow-up question, Carol, and for your responses, Dr. Charly and Dr. Ishmael. Well, as you've alluded to, Dr. Ishmael, this book has some really, really good case studies, some comparative analysis, different countries, Zambia, Kenya, Sierra Leone, Algeria, so many different case studies throughout the book on the various topics that are covered. If I could start with you, Dr. Charly Gatete, could you share with us some interesting insights on the differences in regulation in these various countries, knowing, of course, that Africa is so large and so diverse. Countries are so diverse. Could you give us some of the insights from these case studies on regulatory frameworks, that is, yes?
Yes, that's important. And you know, this book has the advantage, as we were saying, to cover a large part of countries and explaining different positions and different regulatory framework. And how we can see from this from the book that we have two kind of different level of regulatory framework. Some countries who are most advanced situation in construction regulatory framework. I want to say is English-speaking countries are more advanced in this kind of thing. Because what? Because of that. Because regulation energy sector, they already started to discuss on it long time ago before French-speaking countries. So they are, I want to say, some years in advance on this kind of matter. And they are also a background of knowledge and experience that they got during this period. So when we can observe some French-speaking countries, so I want to say at the beginning sometime, and this brings some challenge for those regulator is how to fill the gap, how to deal with the gap of capacity building, the gap of capacity, because those regulators in French-speaking country have to work very hard on capacity building on daily basis, or I want to say on establish some strong regulatory framework in those countries. And this is one of the key insights you can find from the book. That is what I can share, and think that Doctor can add something.
Thank you for that, Dr. Charly. So some distinction between the Francophone and Anglophone countries. What more can you add to enlighten us a little more from these case studies, Dr. Ackah?
Thank you very much. So I think we also saw some countries, let's say Ghana, with two regulatory institutions, one in charge of technical, one economic. When it comes to the market, electricity market, we see Namibia, for instance, moving from a single buyer to a modified single buyer. Meanwhile, in Zimbabwe, they still have a single buyer. So there are some similarities and there are also some differences. If you can see, some countries are more import dependent. For instance, Leon, where, for instance, the cost of import is lower than even the cost of generating power in the country. where we also see some others like Nigeria and Cote d'Ivoire also exporting the West Africa power pool. So based on all these factors, you see how the regulator responds to some of these changes or trends. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Ackah. Carol, might you want to have pose a follow-up question, perhaps?
Yeah, not a follow-up question, just a comment that I think from what our speakers have brought up, it's quite clear that there are certain, complexities and commonalities between the African countries. And I don't know if exploring further those commonalities could actually ensure that, regulatory frameworks that work towards ensuring access, because I think at the bottom of it all is ensuring that, we have to ensure all these Africans who do not have power have electricity. That is the goal. We want our continent to be well lit and to have the energy that is required for economic, industrial, etc. development. So just those case studies came very strongly in looking at some of the things that I observed, are the commonalities and the complexities, but also ensuring that we do understand that Africa has and the different contextually varied situations that will, one size will not fit all. So maybe that is just something that our speakers maybe later will have a chance to expound on, not having one type of regulation fitting all of the context within the African continent. But that's just a comment that came up. Thank you, Louise.
Okay, thank you so much, Carol, for that intervention. I think this line of questioning dovetails very well into another key topic that is addressed in the book on the aspect of cross-border energy trade. As we talk about the similarities, the differences in regulation, and yet the conversation on cross-border power trade is increasingly gaining momentum. We've seen the different power pools at different levels of development now really trying to come together. We've seen initiatives by AUDA and NEPA to have a continental master plan. Can you tell us a little bit about this and what the role of regional regulatory bodies will be towards having cross-border power trade in Africa? What will be the role of regulatory bodies? We could start again with you, Dr. Charly, if you'll allow.
Yeah, thank you, Louise. Yes, Africa is the continent of paradoxes, with some paradox in energy sector. It's a continent where we have a vast potential for energy resources, oil, gas, solar, hydro, wind, but also the continent where we have a lowest energy access. That is more than 600 million people who don't have access to electricity. So in this context, regional electricity markets allow solidarity through energy exchange between countries with some excess of energy capacity, for example, with those who have a gap to fill. And this situation shows the importance of regional electricity market implementation that are implemented actually in Africa. We have a lot of power pools, WAP, which is West African Power Pool, SAP, CPP, EAPP, and those WAP have to be reinforced to allow this increasing of energy exchange between countries. And within that power pools and within these different energy markets, we have some key stakeholders, as we will say, regulator. Can be a regulator body, can be an association or network body, have a key and important role to play in terms of planning and operating the market, but mostly in terms of regulation. They have this key role. For example, in WAP is ERORA, this ECOWAS Regional Electricity Market, who has this key role to play in terms of harmonizing policies and harmonizing regulation within the different countries. That is an important key one. It's allow countries with less developed regulatory framework, with those who are already advanced, to have a harmonization, to allow, of course, exchange between different countries. The second point where regulators have to play a key important role, that point is in terms of developing regulation for access, third-party access to the grid. So some countries have already liberalized the market from the generation to the distribution, and those are not. So regulators have also this mandate to assist and to help countries that are developing regulation that's open the market, the national market, and also as well deal with the question of license. And I want to add another point that's very important for regulator, is the tariff setting. Yes, we have a sound setting at when we are talking about exchange between country A to country B. So this cross-border exchange is important for regulator to arrive to define a very well tariff setting that is attractive as possible for private investor in the market. And this is very important. When the market is attractive, through that's important to have more stakeholders, to have also a price that is very interesting. I want to say affordable at the least at the end for the final consumer. So regulator have to play this key role to develop rules and facilitating energy exchange, and some are very important to take into consideration. I want to finish by this last point also that regulator have to do is to deal also with capacity building of national regulator and stakeholders. It's important that I want SMO, TSO, but also safely regulator at national level to have all the knowledge and the capacity to deal with regional regulator to handle the exchange and the development of the regional existing market. I think that can be all for here, and I can my colleague to add something if you want.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive response, Dr. Charly. Dr. Ishmael, as you also give your input on that question regarding the role of regulators, could you also give us a little more about some examples, success stories possibly towards cross-border power trade across the continent? Dr. Ishmael Ackah?
Yeah, thank you very much. So I think we need to look at the history of the cross-border trade in the region, in Africa. For instance, we see in the 50s interconnection between Tunisia and Algeria, which was mainly more like for political purposes than commercial purposes. After that, we've seen a lot of interconnections, Ghana, Togo, Benin, we've seen Mozambique, South Africa, and others. Initially, we're looking at this bilateral trade was dependent on more like a hidden cost. So they look at an estimated cost to determine the tariff. Later, it was moved to what we call a rational cost, where the kilometer the electrons will travel plus how much you are going to buy, that's the megawatts, are used to determine a rational price for you. Later, we see that the market is moving to what we call a competitive pricing system, where a number of factors are considered so that it will incentivize investors to invest in cross-border energy and trade. So we've come far. Initially, again, it was more hydro-dependent. Again, when you look at Mozambique, South Africa, we look at Ethiopia and Kenya, we look at Ghana, Benin, most of the trade were hydro-dependent, but with the advent of climate change and some of our hydro resources, apart from Inga and others, having challenges, what it means is that we're also considering other forms of technology to generate electricity to trade. So in terms of the role of the regulator, I think I associate with what Dr. Charly said, but in addition to that, we need three critical things, I believe, which the regulator should take leadership. The first one is that, yes, as Doc said, we need to harmonize the regional rules, regional guidelines, and the local rules and guidelines. So within each country, there are generators, transmission company, distribution company, they have rules, they have guidelines that guide the energy system. And now if you are going to another country, those may be different. So how do we have a regional regulator harmonizing these guidelines and rules? So that's the first one. But two important factors I will add. One is investment in transmission system. Again, we also see that, yes, we go to certain countries, they have enough power, but they don't have a transmission facility to transmit the power to other countries. In the past, investment in transmission system was duly more like a government obligation. But we see most African countries, most African government in debt now. The little they have to build schools and hospitals. So there's not enough to more like go and invest in transmission. So that leaves us with two ways to fund transmission services. So either we have maybe a cost-reflective tariff for cross-border trade, which will be done by a regulator, or we have private sector investment in transmission. Already, Kenya and Uganda are looking at private sector investment in transmission, following the example of Brazil and others. So that is a very important part that we have to consider. The second is that we need to also ensure generation. So countries that have the ability and the resources, so resources in terms of energy resources to generate, we also require investment, whether private sector or a PPP, to come in so that they can generate more to transmit. Again, the regulator has a role to play there, one through the tariff and through by also making the processes, licensing processes, very simplified and transparent to attract investment to come in so that we can generate more export. As of now, apart from the Southern African power pool, almost all the other power pools are struggling. Come to West Africa as of 2021, we're doing about just 7% of the energy generated here, trading that. And this was even dominated by 3 countries, Nigeria, Ghana, and Cote d'Ivoire. So we need to do some of these things, harmonization, great investment, and generation, so that we can push the trade forward. Because it's very helpful. As I said, when car power generates electricity in Sierra Leone, they charge 25 cents per kilowatt hour. If the same country, Sierra Leone, imports power from Cote d'Ivoire, they pay 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Just do the math, and we believe that there's a very good case for cross-border trade. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ackah, for that response. Quite some good insights there on the role of the regulator in developing harmonized regulation, the role in licensing, facilitation for private investment in transmission infrastructure, in tariff development. So quite a lot of work for regulators to do in Africa towards enhancing cross-border power trade. Carol, might you have any intervention? You're most welcome. And for participants, please keep putting your questions in the chat. We'll certainly have time to go through these towards the end. Thank you. Carol?
Well, I just wanted to maybe add on to the contribution. Thank you so much, Dr. Ackah and Dr. Charly, for your contributions. And maybe one thing that, you know, some of the gospels of the African School of Regulation and is the single system paradigm. So something that our founding director speaks on a lot, especially when you're talking about the power pool and power trade in Africa, is looking at the power pool and a power pool functioning as a single country, right? As opposed to looking at different countries with different tariffs or different generators or different pricing models, etc. The single system paradigm adds to the regulatory process in such a way that you look at a power pool as one country, and therefore cost allocation and power trade within that pool works as if you are working within one country, or you're transmitting power within one country. So, well, more of those lessons within some of our, of course, our tailored courses, but I just wanted to bring that up, and I don't know if Dr. Charly has maybe a comment on it. Otherwise, we can move on, Louise.
Okay, great. Then we can move on to then another thematic area, if you like, that is covered in the book, which is on gender mainstreaming in energy regulation. Quite a number of articles, by, for instance, Phil Fanu and Emmanuel Graham on putting gender on the corporate agenda in Ghana's oil and gas industry. We also have a very good article by one of the ASR's board members, imperatives for gender mainstreaming in energy sector regulation in Africa. So quite a number of articles there that have been written and included in this book. I'd like to hear your thoughts, kindly, Dr. Ackah, about what is the role of the regulators in promoting gender equity in energy access and in regulation. If I could start with you, Dr. Ackah.
Yeah,
and what
thank you very
policies
much.
have proven effective? Yes.
Okay, thank you. So I think that the regulator can do a lot when it comes to gender mainstream, because there are a few things we have to take note of. The fact is that when you come to the house, we see that in terms of consumption, especially in rural Africa, energy consumption, the impact on women is quite more higher than the impact of men. Because if it's firewood, they have to most of the time go and fetch the firewood, spend time, productive time. When they come, they have to prepare the food. The smoke and other things affect their health and so many other things. So apart from the economic side, you have the health side too. Then there's also issue of the energy decision making. So who makes decision, though they are impacted the most, who makes the decision in terms of the choice of energy we are using in the house and all those ones. Again, normally it's done by the man, probably because in some of these rural areas, the man will provide the money to buy what's supposed to buy. So the person affected most is not the person making the decision. Then when you come to the general corporate world, energy sector, we again see a lot of men in the sector, especially in what they call the hardcore energy sector, engineering, the top management, and so many other things. You see the women in HR, maybe in legal and corporate affairs, and few other areas. So this is what we also wanted to see. What is the African story and what can be done about it? And if there's something that can be done about it, what can the regulator do in addressing that? So yes, something can be done, and in some areas they've started. So for instance, in Kenya today, if you want a license to generate electricity or go into the energy sector, as part of the environmental, social, and impact assessment, you have to also do gender impact assessment to look at, first of all, how you can incorporate, bring in more women, and how your work, whatever you're going to do, will have negative impact on women, which I think is something that can be also adopted in other African countries. When you go to Uganda, they have a special tariff. So the regulator has developed a special tariff for clean cooking fuels, especially the cook stoves and others, so that, it will be affordable for the household to afford to get a clean cooking option than going for firewood and others that may cause health challenges and so many other things. So for me, what we learned from Ife's work, from few others, is that we should be deliberate about this. There should be targets setting, like how we are doing this energy transition 2030, this target. I think we should also be very deliberate in terms of gender mainstreaming and putting the measures to ensure that at least we achieve it. I think we can do it if we want to. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that input, Dr. Ackah. Dr. Charly, some input from your side on gender mainstreaming in African power sector, the role of the regulator, what could be done, kinds of policies. Yes, thank you.
No, I don't want to add more. I want just to add that it's important when a regulator but policymaker have to take decision. You're already aware. You have to base decision on result on data that is a more accurate one. But I think you have to take in consideration vacation of gender mainstreaming when you are collecting data and when you are using those data to plan, to plan the policy, but also to plan regulation. So it's important to consider that data, this creation of gender since the data. So we can be sure that we not miss up the aspect of gender when we are developing regulation and policies. Thank you.
Well, that's quite an important point, Dr. Gatete. Yes, in the data collection, we also need to incorporate gender at that level. Really good insights as well, telling us about the gender impact assessments. So quite some work has been done in East Africa, Kenya, Uganda. There's efforts being made also looking into how the different genders use this the energy. Carol, I know this is a topic that's very close to your heart. So I must allow you some time to ask a question or to make an intervention.
No, I do agree, and I like the examples given by our guest speakers. I think that it's important to look at it at a policy level as well as within the regulation as well. I do not have more to say on it. I believe that what is necessary is to ensure that, like what Dr. Charly says, the data collected has to be representative of the gender, and this data goes into policy making, and therefore it's very, very important. So that is all I can add. Well, echo what our guest speakers have said. Thank you very much, Louise.
Thank you very much, Carol. All right, so I'll just go to our last thematic area before we move into the Q&A session. Please keep putting your questions in the chat. We'll allocate time in the next very few minutes to address your questions. So technology is evolving so rapidly and it's impacting largely the energy sector as well. New emerging technologies, adoption of electric vehicles, distributed energy generation, adoption of renewables. What is the role of regulators in Africa? Are we ready? Are we getting ready for these emerging technologies and incorporating them within the African energy sector across the different countries? I could start with you, Dr. Charly, on that one. What's the role of regulators? Is Africa getting ready? Are we ready? Thank you.
Yeah, we are getting ready, and we have to develop regulation that I want to say align with the development of technology and what I think the emerging technology such as electrical vehicle, and application also of battery storage. That's important. So regulators have also to be aligned with those developments and to make sure that we consider them in the regulation. I want to say we have some regulation that already existing. We have existing regulation that's already here, and perhaps we didn't consider this kind of aspect. But for planning purpose and for anticipation, we know that regulation have to be as flexible as possible. So to consider those new challenges, consider those new technology that is emerging, and be ready to change, because it's important to adjust, to adapt regulation to be in line, but to respond to the need and the demand. And that's the way. From in my side, I think regulation, as we are as a regulator in Africa, we have to be ready. Perhaps we are not ready 100%, but we have to be ready and be free and to adjust as soon as possible regulation to make sure that we consider the new development in terms of technology. That's talking about. Hello, can you hear me? Yes.
Very clearly, yes, we can.
Okay. So to be ready and be flexible as possible. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Louise, you're muted.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, and Dr. Charly, we're hearing you very clearly. At least on my side, we're hearing you clearly. Oh, all right. Dr. Ishmael Ackah, if I could ask you again, pose that same question to you. Where is Africa at in terms of being ready for these emerging technologies? And if I could also add another angle, what could be the potential impacts of these technologies on energy access and affordability?
Okay, thank you very much. So I think Africa, in terms of technology consumption, we are ready and part of it. So especially when you come to solar and others, where we are not doing much, or maybe we are not making much progress, is the technology production. And where that is where value is, that is where you can create jobs, that is where you can develop your economies. So we import solar panels from other countries, we import everything from somewhere. But I think that for us to be ready this time around, we've produced gold, we've exported them in raw. People use technology to refine, we import them back. We've done same with oil, we've done same with cocoa. I think for energy, Africa should start building the capacity, skills, and other things so that at least we'll be part of the production process. Even if we cannot manufacture everything here, we should be able to manufacture some components on the continent so that it can help us. So that is the first one. In order to do that, yes, we need to build a skill. We need to also protect innovation. So people who do research will come out with very nice ideas and other things. We need to have the systems, regulatory systems in place to protect them so that they can do the patent and others so they will protect their innovation. Then I think the last one on that is that we should also be focusing not just on technology to provide light, but technology to also enhance adaptability. Most of these technologies are induced by the fact that climate is changing and the impact on Africa is quite high. I mean, when you look at, though we don't contribute much in terms of carbon emissions, we are facing a lot of challenges. How do we use our own resources and skills to also develop technologies that will help us deal with, minimize the impact of climate change and others, or energy-related climate change on the continent? So these are the few points I'll add. In terms of the role of the regulator, I think one of them is, again, still because in terms of solar and others, the intermittency and others, we need to also lead, support the strengthening of our grid systems so that we can incorporate more renewables. But in terms of access and affordability, solar is becoming very cheap. In fact, in Ghana here, if you take the legacy hydro out, I think the cheapest source of power you may get now coming is solar. But solar is cheap only when you do the procurement right. So the licensing, the regulatory licensing is very important. Somebody can bring solar today to any African country and price it so high. So if you want to get the benefits of solar pricing, the economy of solar, then regulators should put in place mechanisms to do open and competitive bidding processes so that they will attract a lot of competent and cheaper sources of funding so that people will come in and get it. Others are doing it. I mean, we've seen examples in South Africa and other African countries where they are getting solar prices of less than 4 cents per kilowatt hour. So we can do it, but as I said, the regulator should lead in terms of developing a procurement framework that ensures competition and transparency. In terms of access, we again see a lot of villages, islands, and other groups that are outside the grid. So we always hear that about 600 million Africans do not have access to electricity. Now, when you look at do the geographical analysis, you see that most of these are outside city centers. In some cases, outside, so many kilometers outside the grid. So that is where the regulator also has to develop some framework to support mini-grid deployment, upgrade deployment. So if somebody is coming in, again, in some African countries, you see the government taking a lead in terms of providing solar upgrade, maybe solar plus battery plus something upgrade for some communities. But as I indicated, government may not have it all. So we may fall on the private sector. When the private sector is coming in, they want that assurance that when I put in 1 cedi, or $1, I'm able to recoup plus some reasonable return. So it is on the regulator to develop that framework that gives that assurance for investors to come in to put in money for upgrade solutions so we can connect Africa and have that access. So I think these are the areas I like. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Ackah. Quite some good takeaways there, that we need to also go further back in the value chain, looking at the production of these technologies. How can we have production also being done on the continent, looking at protection of these innovations through intellectual property, looking at using technology to adapt to the effects of climate change. So quite a few other things you've added to think about, as well as Dr. Charly. So at this point, I want to thank you so much. My session is now at an end, and I will hand over to Engineer Carol Ofafa to take us through the last phase, which is a Q&A phase. Thank you so much. Over to you, Carol.
Thank you so much, Louise, and thank you to our speakers for going over the contents of the book, the very important case studies, as well as other issues such as emerging technologies and gender, the role of regulation in promoting gender equality within the energy space. So we do have some questions at the Q&A. We have a few questions from Alexis Vissard, Charly Binet as well, and I will go straight into the first question. PPAs are bilateral commercial contracts established ex ante and regulated outside the wholesale market. They can deplete the wholesale market and carry a risk of default from both parties, particularly from the buyer. Could you please give some examples of successful experiments for mini grids in sub-Saharan Africa, such as Tanzania, and rank the different regulatory bodies by giving score? Well, I think it's important to understand, Alexis, that it's very difficult to rank them, but I don't know what without specific parameters that we're looking at. But I think Dr. Ishmael and Charly, if you can maybe give some feedback on some of the examples that have worked, right, within the mini grid space in Africa. Do you have some examples that have worked in that sense?
Okay, thank you. I think I'll touch on two main cases. So one in Uganda, where this is more like the mini grid development is supported by international developed finance institutions. So these the World Bank, or let's say another finance institution, supporting, providing a certain cover, supporting in terms of developing the framework and so many other things. It gives some confidence to the investor. However, in Ghana here, we do not have that direct support. That support is given to the government to provide mini grids for some communities, but we have private companies. One example is a company we call Blasters Energy. What they do is that they go to these communities far away from the grid. They develop the mini grid, they get a registration, develop it, and they sell power to they connect the community, sell power to them, take their money every month. Now, that model has been working for some time, but recently the question people ask is that if the grid finally gets there, what will happen? What will be the arrangement? Will the utility take over the upgrade solution, or what will be the arrangement? So I think the regulator has come in to develop a guideline as to how that can be done. So for instance, the operator can still operate within that. It will be a smaller concession within the utilities area, where they can still operate over a number of period of so that they can recoup their investment. So what I'm saying is that two cases, one where a regulator-backed licensing framework or registration framework has allowed a private company to develop, upgrade, and serving people, and two, where we have either the World Bank or other donor-sponsored institutions supporting, providing a framework, supporting the competitive procurement and others in Uganda, where it's also working very, very well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Charly, do you have something to add?
Yes, I want just to add this example that I've seen in Burkina Faso, that is, they call it association impulsion. That was a long-term or mini grid in a rural area that were no grid there. So they run the projects more than 10 years before the grid arrived in the area. And it was quite a conflictual situation because there was not regulation to deal with this situation. No regulation to deal when the grid reach the zone, the area. What's the arrangement? What is the arrangement? So it was one of the challenges that when I was campus we were trying to solve also and to discuss with the regulator there. That is very important to anticipate. To with the project we are doing, with the different strategy, we are mini grid everywhere. That's basically in campus. And it's important to consider that in regulation and to develop a specific regulation to deal with the situation of when the grid reach is there, how we have to deal, how to make sure that this developer will have a such return on investment, how to deal with if you have to stay, if you have to sell to the utility. So this kind of regulation. So this is an important example that I want to share to show that regulators have to sometimes anticipate and make sure that he's trying to take into consideration all the different aspects on the topic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your contributions. And I think it's quite hitting the nail on the head as we have just a few minutes to go. And I think that we could cover maybe one more question from Robert Aziz, who is in Ghana, who says, how do we ensure regulatory credibility and policy consistency, especially in politically sensitive situations? I believe at the start of the webinar, this was discussed, but I don't know if there's any other matter that we could discuss or add on to this very important question. How do we ensure credibility and policy consistency in politically sensitive situations? Dr. Ackah?
Thank you very much, Engineer Fafa. So, well, I believe that, first of all, it should start with the law that establishes the regulator. But even if the law has been passed already, then the regulator itself should be transparent and accountable. So it should start with them. Transparent in the sense that you need to really ensure stakeholder engagement, because if you don't engage, many people do not really understand why you should determine the price of electricity when you are not producing the electricity. So you should be able to engage, let people understand why there's a need for the regulator, and not just the customers, the policymakers. They get that buy-in. I think that you should be able to do your work and do it well. Well, that is where I will end it, but maybe Charlie can add. Thank you.
No, it's okay. Thing to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, so I think we will leave the last minute just for our closing remarks. I know we're not able to go over all the Q&As, but most of them, as I have had a quick browse, were actually quite good comments contributing to the discussion today. So I would say thank you to our participants for definitely coming in very strongly and giving your comments and your experiences in the Q&A and in the chat section. I would also like to say thank you for joining us today, and we do have other webinars coming up that you can have a look at our social pages, our websites, and find out when next we have a webinar such as this. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our speakers for coming today, for joining us, for sharing their book with us and their experience with us. And we hope that this has been an opportunity to be able to speak more on the book and speak more on the regulatory space in Africa. Thank you very much for joining us, and a warm and most gracious thank you to our discussant who has seen us through this day. We are grateful for your support, Louise, and for the questions that have really helped us understand deeper our speakers' work within this book. So Dr. Ackah, Dr. Gatete, thank you very much. We appreciate and we hope to have another chance to discuss further with you any other outcomes from the book. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.